things from the world standard.
Thank you, Nadia, and it's good to so many friends and colleagues that are with us this morning or this afternoon. I would say, as we all know, this is not a new subject. In fact, many of us, including those on this Zoom call right now, have been involved in intensive dialogues since the mid-'80s on this subject and know the impact that such dialogues can have. We'll come to that with the recommendations. But hence, this is not new, but as Yedidia just said, what is new is now in a nation state law, the commitment of the Israeli government to act on this matter, both on this relationship between diaspora and Israeli Jews and on strengthening heritage Jewish education of diaspora Jews. So the purpose of this was very focused, was to see if engaging Jewish leadership could develop a set of recommendations that JPPI and others could place on the table of the Israeli government as they seek to determine how to move forward. That has been the purpose, and that was the purpose of the 2021 Global Dialogue, which we convened. You've read the report, many of you. It's there. I'll be brief, and we have two wonderful commentators, friends as well, to offer their views. 16 sessions were conducted, 14 of them virtual, with 301 participants. Participants were from North America, most of them, Australia, and Israel. Sessions were convened by Jewish federations, Zionist federations, Columbia University Hillel. Given the focus on Jewish education, we asked the Jewish Education Project to convene educators, so we would have their views could be included in our thinking. And they had two sessions of excellent educators from throughout North America. The Masa program was also involved, and in Israel and Tel Aviv, a program for outstanding education students in Israel. The sessions were convened by large federations, New York, Cleveland, Chicago, as an example, and smaller federations like the Atlantic Council, most of you don't even know it, which is the Federation of Nova Scotia, etc. We do this work and we get quantitative data as well. We'll come back to that. So the participants of these 300 do not reflect what I would call Amcha, Jewish population as a whole. It reflects actually a younger cohort of highly engaged Jews and Jewish leadership. Lamashal, example, 64% were under 45 years of old, 45 years of age. Majority were women. Modern Orthodox identified themselves as 17% of the participants identified themselves as modern Orthodox, 35% conservative. Here, overrepresented from the general population, but I believe closely reflecting the demographics of engaged leadership. The left wing was somewhat overrepresented among Israelis. In Melbourne, Australia, it was a substantially more right-wing and Orthodox group. And as a whole, the participants were those that participated in the dialogues were more traditionally religious and more liberal politically than the general Jewish population. The methodology we used, as we have always in these dialogues, was two-part. There's a quantitative and a qualitative element. Quantitatively, after an introduction, everyone spends 5 to 8 minutes, 10 minutes, completing an online survey. And that allows us to have all sorts of data, both about the participants and their views on subjects. So that's a survey. And then we delve into small, particularly since COVID, breakout groups, virtually convened, 5 to 8 people, where we both introduce the subjects and then elicit through prompts their views on how we should proceed. There were 3 breakout groups, introductions of breakout groups. One was on the state of Israel diaspora relations. We wanted to contextualize it. Many, including some people on this call, Zoom, have written books on this subject. The difference between living in a majority culture, living with sovereignty, and those of us who live as a minority without sovereignty, and far more. So we introduce that, evoke views about how they feel about the other. More specifically, the second was actually on eliciting their views on how to strengthen diaspora-Israel relations, what they sought should be the objective, what methodology should be used. And the third was for the government of Israel, how to strengthen Jewish education. etc. So the findings. First of all, despite all the differences, the majority of older participants said, and that's one quote, in essential matters, all Jews are similar and can identify with each other. The younger participants, on the other hand, spoke repeatedly about a growing distance between American and Israeli Jews. Again, not a shock in the discussions. These participants, and again, the group was younger than most, mentioned the differences in the recent lived experience that they've had. Said differently, they did not live through and experience 67 and 73 and more, as many of us with less hair or silver hair might have. However, despite the differences generationally, overwhelmingly, the participants were positive about the potential impact of increased involvement of the government of Israel in strengthening diaspora-Israel relations. Generally, in the area of Jewish education. First, on the area of Jewish education, somewhat to our surprise, actually, virtually everybody, there was virtual unanimity about the welcoming the greater involvement of the Israeli government in Jewish education, both in curriculum areas and in funding areas. But many were also suspicious or cautious of Israeli government motives and, quote, strings attached. And this was expressed repeatedly by those who were in the groups that were more experienced as volunteer or professional leaders. Without prompting, many expressed the view that the Israeli government should focus in strengthening Jewish education of Israelis, and especially should educate them about diaspora Jewry. Many expressed the view that Israeli Jews do not know about diaspora communities, nor do they appear to really care. So that was on the Jewish education front. In the discussion on advancing ties, we first wanted to clarify how the groups felt, what the objectives of strengthening Israel diaspora ties should be. There were different possibilities. Should it strengthen advocacy? Should it strengthen the ability to provide additional support? Again, somewhat to our surprise, the largest group, 42%, the area they focused on most was to strengthen mutual understanding. Diaspora Jews of Israelis and Israelis of diaspora Jews. 83% in terms of how to do it endorsed the notion of increased encounters and dialogues between ordinary people from Israel and the diaspora. They all repeatedly said there are many at the leadership level, rabbis, Jewish educators, federation leaders, communal leaders, etc., but not enough taking place between and among. I'm talking about diaspora Israel encounters. And they spoke, this is not programmatic, about how to find JCCs that could meet with counterparts, synagogues, counterparts, communities, how Israelis that are here, how we could find ways of engaging them in ongoing dialogues here. They also expressed the view that they were willing and interested to spend time with people that they disagreed with, would be an important framework in Israel diaspora relations. But again, repeatedly, diaspora Jews were uncertain if Israeli Jews have a reciprocal interest in learning and spending time with diaspora Jews per se. 3 policy recommendations, those of you that read the report have seen them. 1, broad agreement that if the objective is to strengthen relations between Israeli and diaspora Jews, the government of Israel should significantly invest in developing diaspora studies or studies of the Jewish people or of world Jewry for the Israeli public school system. This would be a major undertaking. You'd have to deal with professional development, the resources, time and curriculum. No one believes this is easy. But what came out of this, somewhat again to our surprise, was the desire of at least the leadership we engaged to focus on diaspora education, particularly in Israel. 2, substantially increase the opportunities for encounters between Israeli and diaspora Jews should be scaled up, so far greater numbers beyond leadership could have the chance to meet, interact, and learn with and from each other. Some ideas were there, but this is a broad direction. And 3rd, regarding Jewish education, given the concerns that were expressed repeatedly, a collaborative process involving Israeli and diaspora leadership should be established, whether by the Prime Minister's Office, the Ministry of Diaspora Affairs, Jewish Agency with Jewish Agency, JFNA, and leadership to think carefully and together about how the government of Israel ought to actualize this commitment to strengthen Jewish heritage, Jewish education of world Jewry, of diaspora Jewry. These are the three recommendations that the report comes to. Our hope is, based on what we hear now from our respondents, to take these recommendations and advance them to leadership in Israel and at important diaspora groups to see if there can be traction and move them forward. Thank you so much.
Thank you for sharing those fascinating insights with us. I should mention that the report is available in printed form like this, and also on the JPPI's website. Before I call a